Hello, welcome to Talks in the Garden. Today we're going to talk about the book of you, or creating your own memoir. Today we have three distinguished authors, or about to be authors, of their life. Um, I have Miles Ludwig, who is the teacher of writing, who is the author of books and the creator of magazines all over the world and fixing them. And he has taken this talent to teach people here and other places of how to write about themselves. And if you can't do that, he will write it for you. Am I correct?
Yeah, it's possible.
Okay. We have Dee Dee.
D'Anglejean.
D'Anglejean. I've always had problems with all that, but D'Anglejean. And Dee Dee's been my friend for a while, and she is writing her memoir with Miles, but she has written books in the past under her name, Mary Sargent Ladd, and she wrote the book, The French Woman's Bedroom, in 1991. That sounds interesting, Okay. And Michael Ainsley, who I have known for years, who is a very distinguished entrepreneur, has written his memoir, which is on the table, about how he has taken all these challenges and turned them around and to become successful companies.
Well,
And-
not all, but some.
Okay, some, but I was present in the business world at the time, and I can tell you he's done it. So I want to turn this over to Miles.
Okay, all right. Well, I think probably the first thing I should talk about is what is a memoir. It's a peculiar genre, which is very fashionable at the present time, because we're all of a certain age in which we've lived our lives, and so we have many stories to tell about our lives. But it's not an autobiography. It generally focuses on a slice of time that's particularly important to you. And the main thing about a memoir is that it should reveal not so much the events, because that's a procedural view, but about your thoughts and feelings around the events, because that's what people are interested in. I regard a memoir as a gift, both a legacy gift to your family, friends, or whatever, but it's a gift to yourself because it helps you understand what the patterns and themes of your own life have been. So it should therefore be it's in a way, it's a self-help book, but in a very different form.
I really like that, Miles, because when I wrote my book, I used an editor with a firm called Greenleaf Publishing, and every story I told, she worked with me to, what did you learn? What was the nugget? What really came out of this that helped you? And I found that to be very, very helpful as I wrote my book.
That's a good way of going about it. When I'm working on a memoir, I'm ghostwriting a memoir right now, for example, and I've done about 30 hours worth of tape with my subject. But I'm always probing her for how did she feel about this event? What did she think about that? What was her view in this particular situation? So that when I write, and also I pay very close attention to the tone of her voice and the phrases that are peculiar to her, because English is not her first language. She speaks 5 languages, but English is the least practiced. And so I always have to listen very closely to her accent so that I can capture the tone of her voice when I write it. Okay. Which is, I think, that's the challenge of a ghostwriter. I mean, actually.
The tone.
Yeah.
Mhm.
That would be hard.
It's hard. It's very hard. But if you're a writer and And a journalist, because this is a form of personal journalism, it's part of the job. I mean, that's what you have to do. You have to get that sense so that when she reads it, she says, yes, I did this, I wrote this, and that's what's happening.
I think that's wonderful. Do you want
I was going to say that I called my book A Nose for Trouble, and that name came from Felix Miranda. I don't know if you knew him before he passed away, lived here. He and I were having lunch one day, and he asked me about the book. He knew I was working on it. And he said, you have gotten in trouble every decade of your life. Pretty serious trouble. Health, financial, divorces, personal, etc. And I said, Felix, you just named my book. And why that's important to me and why I really made it the theme of my book is that I have a lot of young people that I care about. I have 8 grandchildren, I have 5 children, and I have thousands of Posse scholars. Now, you don't know much about Posse, I presume. I think Dale does. The Posse Foundation started 30 years ago. I was the founding chairman of it. Debbie Beal is the president, still runs it. We find kids from the inner cities, high schools, that are really bright, capable leaders, but they don't have access to the major universities like Vanderbilt and Cal Berkeley and Georgia Tech and Davidson and so on. We form partnerships with those universities and send these kids as a cohort of 10 kids, a posse, 10 kids that have trained together their senior year. We've now sent 10,000 kids through college on this in 30 years.
Fabulous.
It's fabulous.
And those kids don't know. They see a person like me with privilege and white, and they think pure success, whatever. They don't know it's been like this. It's been a lot of downs, not just all ups. And that's what I try and say is I've gotten in some bad trouble financially, and we bankrupted a real estate company I was involved with early on. We had price fixing scandals at Sotheby's after I left, but I was closely related to it. My former chairman went to jail, Al Taubman. How do you deal with all that? How do you learn from it and do better going forward?
Yes.
Dee Dee, what about you?
I would like to introduce Dee Dee,
Yeah.
who is one of my best students. Absolutely.
She talks to you all the time on the phone about her book.
Dee Dee is an elegant writer, absolutely elegant writer, and so charming in her work that it's a joy to hear her work.
Well, she's had
But my teacher, he's always saying, but how did you feel about
right.
it?
And people don't like writing about how they feel.
They
They're
don't even-
happy
Well,
to
it's-
write about events,
Right.
but how do you feel? Well, Dee Dee, I didn't realize you wrote that first book. So how did you get involved in that book?
Well, it sounds like I'm dropping names, but I have to drop this one. Jackie Onassis, who was a friend of mine, was an editor at Doubledays. And she asked me, Dee Dee, I want you to write a book. I know you have a book in you. And I said, well, I've never written a book. She said, well, you're going to. And she said, what subject would you like to do? So I pondered this immense question. And I said, well, what about the French woman's bedroom? She said, that's the best title. Everyone's going to want to read it. And that's how it started.
Oh, that's wonderful.
It's a wonderful book. I've read it, and I just think it's
Well,
wonderful.
I've never even seen it.
Well, I'll bring it and show it to you.
Is it interesting?
It's charming, and it taught me a lot about decorating, which is really not a good term, but it taught me about architecture, it taught me about furniture, it taught me about these people's lives. And
Plus
she
the
managed
fact,
to put all
Miles,
of
that I thought was the most interesting was the history of the bedroom.
the history.
Yeah.
Yes.
Wow.
It's a lovely book, really. You definitely should read it.
So tell me, Miles, what form do you think is the best form of memoir writing? Style?
Well, there is no best form. In fact, of all of the genres, the literary genres, memoir has no rules. Every other genre has a certain kind of rule. Nonfiction has a certain rule. Fiction has a few different rules depending on which school you're going to, I suppose. But a memoir really has to come from you. I mean, and it's just a personal journalism form in which you just have to see yourself as a character in the story. That's the difficult aspect for people. You see, if you do writing fiction, you take the persona of the character. But in memoir, you have nobody to hide behind. And at the same time, it's not psychoanalysis because, everybody's psychoanalysis is boring to everybody except the analysand, right? And the guy that you're paying or the woman that you're paying, right? So you have to find a way to convey these things that engage other people because after all, that's what we really want to know about people. We want to know how they feel about what they're doing.
It's the greatest gift you can give to your children, grandchildren, and society because everybody thinks they're reinventing something and they found out it's already been lived through.
Right.
And how did they solve the problems or not solve the problems? But there are different kinds. I know it's easy for people to write about events, but how do you make a story flow? How do you?
Yes.
Well, let me ask you first. How do you get started?
Well, you can start any place. I mean, literally, what keeps people from writing is fear that they're going to do it wrong, okay? So if you're writing a memoir, there's nothing that's wrong. You just start, that's it. You're working usually on a computer. You could make 12 versions of it before you get to a place where you like it, that's all. And when you like it, that's when it's done. And the forms range from something like Michael's book, or I always loved Deanna Vreeland's book because it was totally taped and then edited by George Plimpton. And it's a hilarious book to read, but it breaks all the rules of what you think a memoir might be.
Oh, I should read it.
It's a marvelous book, and reading it opened me up to what memoirs are as well.
And it's got her voice.
Yeah, it's absolutely her.
I knew her.
Yeah, you can hear her.
Yes, I knew her. But he's a good writer. George was a good writer.
Well, he was an editor.
That's right.
He
magazine.
He is a good writer. He was a good writer. But in this case, he functioned as an editor. And then he may have written some transitions or something.
You mentioned something important. I know Michael talked about it because I asked Michael how he got his book published and how do you find an editor? How do you find the good editor? And so many of them are very old today. I have friends that were top editors. But who's the editor today? How can you find this?
Well, that's the mystery, isn't it?
Well, Michael, how did you find it?
Well, I really through an old friend, Bill Donaldson, up in New York, and his wife. I was introduced to this firm in Austin, Texas called Greenleaf that ended up publishing my book, and they gave me an editor to work with, and she really was fantastic. She tied the very disparate parts of my life and stories together in a way that flowed and I think worked very well. I started my book, you say you can start anywhere, I agree with that. I started in the boardroom of Lehman Brothers the night we declared bankruptcy. And I was in that room, I was on that board, and I know what happened. And the second reason for the young people that I wrote my book is that there's a long story about Lehman that's never been told. I tried to do that in my book because lawyers kept us as board members from talking for 5 years. We were muzzled. And the story that Hank Paulson and Ben Bernanke told is not true. They had all the resources possible to save Lehman Brothers. They chose politically not to do it. So that was another reason for writing my book. I don't think Hank Paulson will like my book or does like it. I have a feeling he's read it. But I was carefully advised by a good legal lawyer up in New York as to how to say what I said on those sensitive points. But I think that's another important part of why I think a really important memoir, when you know something that isn't generally known and you can deliver
reveal
it.
it.
I think you need to do that. So I included that.
But politically, why did they do this? Is the question I wanted to ask you.
Well, the only answer that one can come up with is that Mr. Paulson was a Goldman Sachs retiree, and the next week they did bail out a firm that owed huge amounts of money to Goldman Sachs, AIG. And they gave AIG literally $80-some billion of bailout. I don't really call it a bailout because they actually made money on that. The government actually was paid back the 80-some plus another 35-40 billion. So AIG was a big part of the story, and Goldman Sachs was right there. And my own feeling is that Paulson said, I can't save both, so I'm going to let Lehman go, and I'm going to come up with a story to cover it.
I see.
Well, how did it feel to be in the boardroom on that?
It felt horrible. It was the most painful. You really had no control. They told us, they literally called, and there was a voice in the ceiling of the boardroom saying, you need to do, this was the chairman of the SEC, you need to do what you need to do. Declare bankruptcy tonight before the markets open in Asia tomorrow morning. One of our directors stood up and said, is the federal government telling us to bankrupt Lehman Brothers? He said, I'm not saying that, I'm just saying you need to do what you need to do, which we knew what he meant.
But the feeling, it really is what
Helplessness.
It's helpless.
It was
The
very,
other question,
very-
having read your book, I wanted to ask you about was Sotheby's. Now, did you see this coming?
No.
Because you were retired when it happened. You had left. You and Taubman had decided
ways.
that you didn't want to continue working together.
Right. After 10 years, I left Sotheby's, and my successor, Dee Dee Brooks, began illegally meeting with the CEO of Christie's and coming up with a very complex set of rules to run the business, which were all illegally agreed to. No, I didn't see it coming.
Did you know this was going on? No.
In fact, I didn't know it until 5 years later. I was at a brunch at David Gilmour's house here in Palm Beach, and he said, have you seen today's Financial Times? I said, no. He said, I think you should go in my library and sit down. It's lying there. I knew you would want to read it. There above the fold on the front page, Sotheby's Christie's price fixing divulged.
Oh.
That was 5 years after
Wow.
it happened and after I had left the company. So no, I had no idea it was coming. It was, and again, furious. I mean, how could someone be so blatantly immoral?
Yes, and not only that, I only met her once, only because my name is Dee Dee, but spelled completely differently. And she looks, very presentable and very honest and very everything else. To think she was that devious.
She's one of the most brilliant and talented people I've ever known.
Uh-huh.
Why she felt the need to cheat, and she pled guilty to a felony, and then she said that Al Taubman made her do it to keep her job, and he went to jail for a year.
Is that why he went to jail?
Yes. He was convicted of price fixing. And I say in the book, I give several examples of how he often disagreed with me for the 10 years I was CEO. Never once did he tell me what to do.
Mm-hmm.
He was, in many ways, he was a good chairman because he was challenging, but he didn't micromanage.
Yeah,
So I don't believe that he made Dee Dee Brooks do what she says he made her do. I think Dee Dee Brooks did it, and then she may have told him, I don't know. I knew nothing about it because I was literally out of the company at that point.
Well, you were lucky to be out of it.
Well, I've been a lot luckier, and so would Al Taubman if I'd stayed, because I would never have done that. It was unnecessary.
Yes, but the thing is, would you have known what she was doing?
Well, if I had stayed, she wouldn't have been in the position to do it.
Yeah, I see.
I mean,
I see.
because she became CEO, she had access to Christie's, and anyway, it was a very painful experience. Again, that's one of the things, the reasons for these young people to realize that there are circumstances where you really lose control and can't do much to correct a big problem.
Yeah.
May I ask Dee Dee? You're now writing about you, your family. You've had illustrious people in your family as sergeant, a singer sergeant. You've known the world. You are an American who had two husbands.
Yep.
One Spanish speaking.
No, one half Cuban, half French.
Oh, half Cuban, half French.
And the other one 100% French.
And you're talking about your life and hopefully what you felt about it.
I began age 4, which is my own, that I have no memory before.
Okay. And what have you gone through to write it?
Do you know something? There's nothing more terrifying than the blank page. But all of a sudden, if you just sit and look at it, things come back. This is what's happened to me. And I mean, at 6, I had an out-of-body experience. I hadn't thought about that for years. You know, so all of these things come back as you look at the blank page or the computer today.
So what did you do? What was the first thing you did? Did Miles give you questions
No.
that you should answer?
No, he let his little group off. he unleashed us.
How did
and
he
off we
unleash
went.
you? How did he
Well, because he
unleash you?
told us what he thought a memoir should be. Because I didn't really know what a memoir could or should be, having never done it before. And it's endless. I mean, I'm only up to 35 years old, end of first marriage, you know? And I'm, many more years after that, and many, many more experiences. So it goes on. And now I remembered in the middle of the night, before I married and had gotten out of Foxcroft, I remembered that I was sent to Spain and the lodgers were ambassador, and I stayed with them because they were, Aunt Emily was, anyway, a cousin. And from there, I had 2 extraordinary years in Spain. Well, I had forgotten about this and I hadn't put it in, So back to Ulysses, and then you put these things in.
So did you write it down or dictate it?
No, I just write.
She has an elegant style.
Well, Miles, you've offered
Well,
told
I
me to
keep-
go talk into a machine.
I
Well-
gave her a machine.
You did.
Yes.
I know.
I mean, you live your life, and I just went from I have not written. I'm a lousy storyteller. I need someone who knows how to tell a good story. But you go and live your life, and you don't think it's that important, and because you take it for granted. This is how you're living.
Right.
And then someone says, "Oh, but you have a story."
Right.
See, I think everybody has a story.
Of course
Yes.
they do.
And they have a story for their family, is for their community, because we all go through tough times, easier times. It's usually the tough times that make you who you are. But you don't want to tell that because who on the hell wants to go through tough times? But it is, and I'd be interested in seeing how many stories are going to be about people going through this period of time. Like my granddaughter graduated from high school. They didn't have a graduation. Kids look forward to graduation. And what are they thinking about? What do they want to accomplish,
Yeah.
And here we are sitting here sequestered in our homes,
Right.
afraid to talk to people. And it makes you become introspective, and it gives you an opportunity. So I am really happy that we can bring this to people, to tell you, sit down, write. If you're bored or if you're afraid, turn the TV off,
Right.
okay? Turn your TV off, sit down, and just think about your life. I know many people here have told me since they've been sequestered, they didn't know how much they love not going out as much because it's a big social deal down here. It's like a job. You have one event after another, and it's the best way of running away from your family.
And yourself.
And yourself, that's what I'm saying. I don't mean your family, I really mean yourself. Do you have anything else to say about, to sum this up so we can help people?
Well, there are two people that that I think are important in the field in terms of learning how to think about a memoir. And one is Vivian Gornick, who has written her own memoir, but her book, which is The Situation and the Story, is an excellent text to understand what a memoir is about. And the other person is a very well-known, well, Vivian is well-known, of course, but Mary Carr, who I think teaches at, I'm not sure whether it's Princeton or Syracuse, and is a very charming and wonderful, funny person. She also has written several memoirs, and those are the only two people that I would rely on for assistance in terms of writing a
So
memoir.
people can go and get their books. And how do you spell Gornick?
Gornick.
Okay.
I'm amazed I could
Gornick.
do that.
Fine. Well, I thank you. Anything else you have to say that you wish you said or you wish you didn't say?
I would only say that writing a book is a lot of work, but as someone told me, it's really fun to write a book. It's a lot more fun to have written a book.
Yes. Well, thank you guys.
I think
Thank you,
writing is anguish also.
It is.
Oh yes.
It's like giving birth.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Dale.
Thank you.
Thanks,
I
Dale.
appreciate this. Hope this inspires you.
Thank you.